So let's turn to the books, and this is a weird subject now, right? Because it used to be we'd have to be like a very clear, like, okay, now we're going to go into stuff in the books they haven't gotten to on the show.
And like need a spoiler warning for that. But we're sort of, every single storyline in this episode was not in the books.
Right.
Not even like different, but just not in the books.
Yeah. But now, of course, we were going into things, and we don't know, we're not going to know the answer for years to the fact of how much is the show directly now, quote unquote, spoiling the books versus just taking its own path, and we're not going to know for a while. But I do want to talk about some stuff. So the only warning I'll say is we're going to talk about stuff that through the 5 books and things that happen in this episode that haven't happened in those books, but it might not be a spoiler per se.
Yeah, who knows if that will end up happening or not. But the reason why it took me a little while to wrap my mind around this episode is when I'll put it into some context. The Dorne storyline was such a big part of Feast for Crows, right?
Yes.
It was a huge part of that. So when they introduced it last season, they didn't do too much with it. I was like, okay, well, there's more to come. And there were these characters who were so established in the books, in Quentin, who they sort of did away with, and now it's Trystane in the show-ish. And then Prince Doran, who, the crown prince of Dorne. For them to be killed like that in this episode and just be gone, I was like struck. I was like, oh no, like I can't wrap my mind around this as someone who's been reading these books for so long. It was really shocking, and I mean, it's not always saying again that like this is a character who's going to be dead. These are characters who will be dead in the books, just like whatever happens with Stannis going forward down the line. But I still can't really wrap my mind around what that means and what they're going to do with the Dorne storyline from there.
That was interesting because the Dorne storyline, by and large, was not a popular one last year on the show. I certainly wasn't a big fan of it. And I was really disappointed because the idea of like Jaime and Bronn teaming up and going to this new land sounded...
And the Sand Snakes are like so cool in the books.
It should have all been awesome, and then it really dragged, and it was kind of like a part of the season that I felt just didn't work. So we're an interesting point with Game of Thrones because Benioff and Weiss, the showrunners, are pretty private at this point. They certainly don't want to give out any spoilers. They don't do many interviews. And so I don't know. I'd be curious to ask them, and maybe they wouldn't be able to be completely honest. I don't know. But I felt like, this was almost an acknowledgement that
like a reaction
that like a course correct. Like, okay, that, because we even wondered initially, like, are they going back to Dorne this season? Given it didn't really work last year, but there's still some stuff to deal with. And it felt like, okay, we're just going to freaking kill off
I feel
lot
like
of these characters.
They cut through the conflict. Also, like, how did Obara and I'm blanking on the other Sand Snake's name, her sister. How did they get to like King? Were they just on the boat the whole time? How did they kill Trystane when he was on the boat that Jaime and Myrcella would?
Was he on the boat with them?
Yeah, because they all traveled together.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
Unless I'm misremembering, in which case I apologize to everyone who is surely yelling at me in the comments. But still, I mean, like it showed that shot of them in King's Landing. I'm really curious. Maybe there is going to be something more. Cersei obviously is not going to be happy with the situation in Dorne and is going to want to get revenge. Though it does seem like her focus is really going to be focused on the High Sparrow and the fight against them.
I also think that the Sand Snakes again, I loved them in the book, and then on the show they were okay, but not nearly as cool as they should have been. And I was like, okay, well that was a pretty badass scene for them. I mean, certainly
the Trystane death.
The Trystane death, sure. And the whole like which one, and the spear through the face, which is one of the more graphic deaths, which is saying something. For this show, it just seemed like I felt like there was a lot of it was kind of funny because we don't really know for sure, but I felt like there was a bit of a reaction and maybe even acknowledgement. They might just not have been happy themselves with how the Dorne storyline works. So they're like, okay, let's kill a couple of these characters and let's make these characters that we wanted to be cooler.
Yeah.
And so like instantly up their threat level.
I'm curious to see if it's going to win back any fans of the Sand Snakes. I mean, it didn't make me necessarily like them anymore. I did think killing Doran off was sort of a waste of Alexander Siddig, who's a really talented actor.
Never really had a lot to do on this show.
Yeah, but I do think, Yeah, Ilaria is really cool, and some of the other characters. So.
I just do wonder if, Ilaria, the Sand Snakes, will they move? Will they go to King's Landing? Because, I just feel like if you look, when we look back at Game of Thrones in its entirety, when it's done, most people are probably going to say that Dorne storyline, not a high point.
Yeah, I think it was the first time that the show really dropped the ball, to be honest.
In a major, I'd say, and like when you look at the entirety of a storyline, just being like, that didn't work. So I did feel like this premiere was just shifting it in a big way.
But big change, and now we really have no idea what's going on in Dorne,
right?
Because it is so far off anything that is going on in the books.
Yeah. It'd be weird if that was the last time we saw any of those characters, but
I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt it.
I bet we're gonna see. I feel like revenge is a big thing this season. We're gonna see some revenge.
Yeah. So let us know what you thought in the comments about that. Did this help you sort of improve that Sand Snakes and that whole Dorne storyline, or are you still kind of like, I don't want to deal with Dorne anymore? There is a lot to talk about with Game of Thrones every week, and a ton of characters, and I know we didn't go into like details.
We focus on the biggies to us.
Yeah, and certainly, not to say that Tyrion and Dany and Cersei aren't huge characters. It's just this episode they didn't have as much as some others. So don't worry, we'll be getting to them. But if there's anything you want to talk about in the comments, please feel free about specific storylines that really excited you. Let us know in there. But we will be back every week this season talking about Game of Thrones, and for plenty more on all things games and all things Thrones, keep it here at IGN.